Good morning. Our scripture this morning comes from Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 36. I want to begin by asking you a question. What's your philosophy of life? You know, the set of beliefs that determine your view of the world and how you live in it. You probably can't answer that in 10 words or less, and maybe not at all until you give it some deep consideration. But I really think it's worth examining, because our philosophy is instrumental in creating our legacy. It begs that proverbial question, if you died right now, what contribution to the world would you leave behind? A lot of people have lived a long time without making any difference in the world. So many of us live our daily lives hoping that the demands of the gospel will let us just get by with being good people and trying to be fair in our dealings with the world. And then we read what we read this morning, if you read this scripture, and it takes all of our laid-back anticipation about living the life Jesus wants us to live and sends it into a tailspin. There's nothing laid back about this life we're called to. The gospel lesson this morning is a continuation of Jesus' sermon on the plain. And these are tough words to hear, let alone live. This is the stuff that sets the Christian faith apart from other philosophies and other religions. Heck, from a worldview, this is the stuff that sets the Christian faith apart from common sense. But at the end of the day, it's what defines the core of Christian ethics. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Can we really love our enemies? And if we can't, then why did Jesus give us this impossible command? If you struggle with this teaching, don't worry, you're not alone. Christians have always had a tough time figuring out or trying to explain away Jesus' uncompromising demand that we love our enemies. 100 years ago, Albert Schweitzer, who was a great Christian, maintained that when Jesus made that statement, his followers never expected to live like that for very long, because the first disciples and then later the early church believed that Jesus was going to return very soon, in a few years at most. So Schweitzer held that the command to love one's enemies was temporary in its time. But Jesus didn't return immediately. And so the church was stuck with an ethical command no one can live up to. Paul put an interesting spin on this saying by quoting from the Proverbs. He said, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him drink. For by so doing, you heap burning coals upon his head. Sounds like loving your enemy is a good way to do him in, but I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind. Now, you can do with this scripture what contemporary culture has done with so much of scripture and reinterpret the Lord's words to make them fit more comfortably. But ultimately, I have to conclude that Jesus meant what he said, because he didn't make any exceptions. We are to love those who despise us and bless those who curse us. It's these commands that lead some to say, that's just too radical for me. They're not sure they can handle a religion like that. They'd rather it be more socially acceptable, in line with the way they ordinarily do things. They want a nice, safe, domesticated religion, and loving one's enemies ain't it. Loving one's enemies just isn't the way the world does things, not even close. When your enemy is down, you kick him. You get smacked on one cheek, you make sure you hit back twice as hard. If he has a big bomb, you get a bigger one. That's realistic. That's how the world works. But that's not how Jesus works. Christians didn't invent love, nor do we have a monopoly on it. I mean, I don't know of any culture that says to love isn't good. The difference comes in defining who you love. The world says, love those who love you. But you don't need to be a Christian to love those who love you. As Jesus said, if you love only those who love you, why should you get credit for that? Even sinners love those who love them. That sort of hangs love out there and makes it sound like a mutual commercial transaction. If we take this text seriously, we're challenged by much more than a mutual transaction, more than the ways of the world. We have a whole new, radical, difficult, and maybe even impossible moral principle to live into. Jesus never indicates that Christians won't have enemies. While I like to think that Christians can get along with everybody, I remember that Jesus said, "Beware when all speak well of you." If I never do or say anything that's going to disturb racists or challenge people who choose violence or perpetuate injustice, if I don't oppose abuse and the insensitive and disrespectful, I may never have an enemy, but I won't have been faithful to the gospel either. Jesus was right. Christians will have enemies. We just need to make sure we have the right enemies. I'm not afraid of being controversial when it comes to doing the right thing. If Christianity means remaining neutral about everything so that you never have an enemy to contend with, then Jesus wasn't much of a Christian. Christians should try to make peace and get along with everyone, but if we are faithful to the teachings of the Master, there will be those who try to silence us. Faithful Christians will have enemies. How are we supposed to love them? Can we take a pill or quote a verse from the Bible or say a prayer that will change our hearts? If I don't love someone, can I reprogram myself and convince myself that I do? That might get me an A for effort, but I'm going to get an F for performance. So if I can't feel differently, maybe I can act differently. Maybe the difference in my actions is the way I can change my attitude. Because Christian discipline takes practice. Jesus says, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on the cheek, offer the other. Do to others as you would like them to do to you. Did you hear those words? Bless, pray, offer, do. I think the secret is in the doing. I may not be able to control how I feel, and it's hypocritical to pretend to feel differently than I do. But I can control my actions. If I have someone who has wronged me or someone I love, and I wait until my opinion or my mood or my feelings change, I could wait forever. The only hope of overcoming a deadlock like that is if one of us, namely me, changes how I act. Sometimes it's impossible to change our attitude until we change our behavior. Madeleine L'Engle wrote, "Love isn't how you feel, it's what you do." There was a Christian man from India who had a powerful ministry bringing hundreds of Hindu and Muslim students to Christ. How did he do that? How did he reach these members of radically different cultural and religious traditions? Well, every Sunday he and his wife host 30 to 50 students for dinner. And a friend asked him, "So you talk about Jesus Christ at these meals?" He said, "No, we cannot talk openly of Jesus Christ." When the friend asked him then how he was able to bring so many of them to Christ, he responded, "I love them until they ask me why." Oh, I love that. We live in a fear-based world of anger and hate and vengeance. Our only hope in changing this world is the love of Jesus Christ. I mean, can you see any other hope for the world? Then that the love of Jesus Christ be revealed to all people. If you can, I hope you'll share it with me. Ephesians 4:31 and 32 says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. It says get rid of all, not just some. Get rid of it all. There's a better way. Actions speak louder than words. Show the love of Jesus Christ and let that love change the world. Jesus knew not everyone was going to listen to his teaching. The kind of love and generosity and mercy that he expected from his followers just doesn't make sense. It's risky. It's asking us to give up our rights and our pride and our comfort. But it is the most powerful way possible for us to show the world that we belong to Christ. The words of Jesus' Sermon on the Plain aren't an illustration of how things work in the world. They are a picture of how things work in God's kingdom. That's what Jesus came to bring, and the church exists in the world to bring evidence of it. We're the advance party of God's kingdom. We've been assigned to raise the standard of the kingdom before a world that's ruled by revenge and violence. Can we really love our enemies? By the rules of the world, I'm pretty sure we can't. But by the grace of God, we can. By the grace of God, by our actions, we can love them until they ask us why. And then we can tell them. Thank you for worshiping with me today.